Thanks for watching Rachel and Ralph's reality check, where us two old school political insiders give you the scoop on everything that's really going on behind the scenes. You all know my co-host Ralph Benko. He is the weekly columnist at Newsmax. He's co-author of the Capitalist Manifesto, and he is the co-founder and chair of the 180,000 Facebook group, A Capitalist League. And I am your other humble host. I'm a longtime contributor to Townhall and the editor and founder of Intellectual Conservative. So today we are going to discuss two columns that we have written. I just wrote one on how traveling has become really woke, and I'll tell you about new guidelines that travel writers are getting stuck with. And then we'll move on to Ralph's column. He has written about the 50th anniversary since Nixon took us off the gold standard, and what a devastation that has been. So to begin, my article basically exposes that there's this American Association of Travel Writers that is pressing and pushing its writers to include all this progressive stuff in their articles. And it's a very powerful association. Most people, you need to be a member of it. It may not be mandatory, but there are certain things you're going to miss out on. For example, they give their writers awards, and their awards are for, people who are responsible and things like that. So you're basically going to be excluded from a lot of that kind of stuff if you don't go along with it. And one of the things they've done that is really extreme is they've actually come out with a vocabulary. They tell their writers what you can and can't use. So basically there are about 20 phrases or words they've come up with that they say are problematic. And for the most part, you can't even use these words. They include things like vagrant, urban, uppity, thug, basic things like third world, minority, loud, long time no see, brown, aggressive, Caucasian. I mean, the list goes on and on. It is really Orwellian. Some of them, they explain why. There's ones where people have taken a regular old phrase and, over the years, some people have put an offensive term instead of one of the regular words. So now the phrases are not considered acceptable, but I mean, some of them are just bizarre. And then my article, I also point out about how you have to be careful in terms of whether you're writing about a place, if they're woke enough. Do they embrace critical race theory? Do they have a whole bunch of horrible right-wing laws that need to be exposed? And so it's just become really oppressive. And I feel like, the left has these political views that they no longer try to just deal with in politics. They're now trying to voice them into every area of our life. You cannot do anything, whether it's eat, whether it's go to a restaurant, whether it's travel, without having the left try to come in and dictate everything. So what say you, Ralph?
Well, you hit a bullseye, maybe even two bullseyes. And your column and the implications of it are even more profound than even Rachel Alexander, I suspect. But I mean, there are two things. In 1984, by George Orwell, the iconic novel about totalitarianism, there is an appendix, and he talks about thought crimes and newspeak. And what we talk about is, what we used to talk about as political correctness, and now we talk about as wokeness, is straight out of George Orwell's Newspeak. And under Newspeak, the totalitarians who fancy, going by euphemisms like the left or progressives, but really they're totalitarians. They want to control speech, so it makes it literally impossible for you to even think thoughts, because we think in words, right? And if they can control the vocabulary, they can control our thoughts. And what they're doing here, without coming right out and saying it, because they haven't achieved total control yet, is they're attempting to legislate what Orwell called thought crimes. Big Brother is watching. And by that, I don't mean Mark Zuckerberg. He's just a businessman, okay? But I'm simply saying this is right out of 1984. And the only thing they haven't done is declare it in the syntax and grammar of 1984 of newspeak and thought crimes. So that was your first bullseye when you identified this as having been inserted into even travel writing and having a board of public intellectuals who are attempting to dictate the, they claim that the social media is trying to infringe on freedom of speech. Man, the social media is like Mother Teresa compared to what the left is doing by grabbing control of these mediating organizations, these standard-setting organizations, and then using it to coerce people, whether it's through the carrot or the stick. The carrot being giving them prizes if they toe the line, and the stick being providing them with opprobrium and condemnation and criticism and marginalization, one of their favorite words, pushing them, deplatforming them, and pushing them off of their venues where they get to write right now if they don't toe the line. That actually goes back to a little known but absolutely fundamental architecture of the modern left, which was invented by actually a wonderful man, but it's been debauched, it's been prostituted now, called Antonio Gramsci. Antonio Gramsci was the head of the Italian Communist Party, and he spent most of his adult life, very short adult life, in jail because he was anti-fascist. But he was really anti-fascist. The fascists of Italy, the fascist party run by Mussolini, put him in jail because he was really anti-fascist, not these thugs who call themselves anti-fa and who are actually themselves fascists. How ironic is that? Gramsci worked, I think he died in his early 30s, having been horribly abused by the actual fascists, but he was a leading thinker in terms of how the then liberal left should progress to take power. Okay, and his position was, we are too small and weak to take over the government as communists. Okay, but we can take over the little organizations like this travel writers bureau. A few of us can just really, since the right doesn't know the game and isn't paying attention, a tiny handful of us can take over the board of directors and then begin to dictate terms. And therefore, we can begin to use that organization or the Rotary or the Church Vestry or the local PTA, all of which have trusted, they're small groups, but they have trusted brands. And if we take over those organizations because the right is just not paying attention and is just, hey, we're not going to fight for it. The labor unions, locals of the labor unions, okay, they move in and they take over and they use it to push what they call cultural hegemony. They want to attack our very brilliant, benevolent cultural hegemony of liberty, free market capitalism, prosperity, dignity, Judeo-Christianity. Okay, that's the cultural hegemony that the founders of this country originally created. You can read all about it in this piece of capitalist propaganda called the Declaration of Independence. Okay, that we established a cultural hegemony that lasted for 200 years, and it led to prosperity and dignity, and was perfect by no means. We tolerated slavery. That was wrong. We're now getting over that, but we have expanded the franchise. If you look at the constitutional amendments to the U.S. Constitution, something like 10 out of the 26 after the Bill of Rights have been used to expand the franchise to women, to former slaves, to people to young people, and so forth. We have been making steady progress over more than a century to advance human rights. And even though it wasn't perfect, it's, people are not fighting to get out of the United States, they're fighting to get into the United States because we are exceptional. We are the best country that exists or has ever existed. But the left understands through the study of Gramsci, and I recommend all of our millions of listeners, as well as you, go to the internet and read up on Gramsci. I was taught about Gramsci by Michael Joyce, who was then the head of the ultra-conservative Bradley Foundation. So what you are seeing is a perfect example of what Rudy Dench called the long march through the institutions, taking over these smallish entities and using them to leverage their newspeak and their thought crimes in order to create a communist, nihilist, undifferentiated, totalitarian cultural hegemony to replace our wonderful liberal, small L liberal, small R Republican, Judeo-Christian, capitalist, dignified cultural hegemony. That's the game, and you put your finger right on it, and I hope you will poke them right in the belly button with that finger.
I'm still going to write a lot more about that, overall general topic. And I wanted to point out that, even though the government isn't the one instituting all of these politically requirements, I'm going to have an article coming out shortly in the future about how a lot of our corporations are no longer purely private because the government is telling them what to do in so many aspects. For example, their HR departments, they are under so many government federal laws telling them what they can and can't do, that to say, oh, it's just a purely private corporation, or, this is just a purely, voluntary travel writers organization, it's no longer the case. Government has its hands and feet in all these different areas, and these entities are not operating, independently of government, just the free market anymore.
Well, thank goodness you've finally come around to my point of view that we should stop pistol whipping our most successful corporations like Facebook and Google, and we should, if anything, we should be encouraging them to tend to business, do what is profitable for their owners and what is beneficial for their customers, and instead of and we should be in there fighting the way or insinuating ourselves onto these board of directors. Rachel, you would make a divine chairman of the board of Google. So I think what we need to do is we need to get our millions of listeners to this podcast to start beating the drums to appoint Rachel Alexander as the next chairman of Alphabet, the holding company for Google. Think you're up to it? I think you'd be darling.
Even if I was remotely interested in it, there's not a snowball's chance in hell they would ever pick me for a position like that.
Well, it's their loss. It is their loss. So, but listen, you're making a very good point, which I want to expand on. The left knows how to gain control of the regulatory agencies. The left knows how to use Congress, especially the House, to put pressure on the economic and social institutions. Okay, it's and the left has read its Gramsci and knows how to take over these little groups and use them as a front, so to speak, in order to advance its totalitarian agenda. The left will win unless we wake up, unless we get woke, you should pardon the expression, to the game that's afoot, and that we say, hey, if we, listen, all of the Gallup polls, all of the polls I read, say that there are twice as many conservatives as there are progressives. There are twice as many people on the right as there are on the left. But you know what? That does us no good unless we engage. The left really knows how to get in there and get their hands on the levers of power. Okay? It's not complicated. You know how to do it. I know how to do it. And all I want is for our millions of listeners to pay me millions of dollars to teach them how to do it too, so that we can actually go in there. If we tried proficiently, if we used our skills to take over the levers of power, whether they are civic or whether they're governmental or whether they're economic. We could blow the left away. And you know what? I got nothing against the left. I see you're wearing these wonderful big hoop earrings, and that means
I'm going to the Carrie Rake rally for governor tonight. So,
well, okay, but all I'm saying is my motto has always been, and it seems to me like maybe you're coming around: capitalize with the capitalists, but socialize with the socialists. They throw much better parties. So good
well,
on.
I will never forget that MoveOn.org party you snuck me into.
Yeah. Yes, I know. That's right.
A lot of fun.
In Pittsburgh with Shep Ferry, the Obama Hope poster guy, DJing it. Yeah, it was a blast. So, it's like, look, all I'm saying is we need to get in, we need to engage rather than complain. And too many people on the right spend their time complaining about, what the left does. Okay. I got nothing against the left. Okay. Some of my best friends are leftists. What I have is an objection to the totalitarians who are legislating thought crimes through the use of newspeak to bring about 1984. I don't know, maybe 30 or 40 years late, but from their point of view, better late than never. We can beat them at their own game, but we have to play the game.
Okay, and I just want to point out that, having been a lawyer and gotten into it with the bar after many years, I realized that the reason why there are so many leftists in control of the bar is because, unlike us conservatives, they are less likely to have families and church obligations. So they've got more free time to sit on all these really boring committees and take them over. And so it is going to be an uphill battle for us to start getting engaged on some of these, organizations that we, previously had no interest in. But you are correct. We have to do it. We need to just shut up, stop complaining, and that's what we need to do about it. So that makes a good segue into your interesting column about the 50th anniversary of leaving the gold standard.
Yes, on August 15th, 1971, Richard Nixon gave a speech to the nation after having spent 3 days at Camp David, saying that he was going to impose a 10% tariff on all imports to America. He was going to impose wage price controls, forbidding corporations to determine how much they would charge for their products or how much they would pay their employees. And both of those were basically very temporary, and they were within a year or two. George Shultz, who was Nixon's OMB director, then Nixon's Treasury Secretary. I think he later on became Secretary of State, but he was a pretty good economist, except for on monetary policy. And he basically tore down that tariff wall. Good on George. And he basically imploded the wage price controls, which are absolutely horrendous. However, it looked like a bold move on Nixon's part. He knew nothing about economics. He was an economic moron. But the American people are economic morons too. So they liked his speech talking about how the third thing he did was, quote, temporarily, now 50 years later, is longer than my ancestors wandered through the desert in Sinai, which was only 40 years, temporarily closing the gold window, which was the last link to the gold standard. And he said, let me lay to rest in his speech to the nation, which I quote in both of my columns this week, one at Newsmax and one at the New York Sun published today. He said, let me lay to rest that bugaboo called devaluation. The dollar today will buy as much as the dollar tomorrow. Well, that was technically true in a very Nixonian sense, because on August 16th, the dollar did buy as much as the dollar bought on August 15th. But thanks to him closing the gold window, the buying power of the US dollar dropped by 85% over the next 11 years. Some people say that it dropped as much as 90%. He did not stabilize the dollar as he promised he would in his speech to the nation. He completely destabilized the dollar. And so the buying power of the dollar in 1789, when the United States was first founded under the Constitution, was identical to the buying power of the dollar in 1930. And then in 1931, in the early 1930s, thanks to the need to devalue the dollar, thanks to the Genoa Accord of 1922, which I'm not going to bore our listeners with, FDR correctly devalued the dollar from $20.67 per ounce of gold to $35 per ounce of gold. And the buying power of the dollar having been reduced by about 50% as a means to bring the Great Depression to an end, the dollar still maintained its value rock solid, good as gold from 1931-ish to 1971. And then it fell out of bed thanks to Nixon closing the gold window. And that was we had double-digit inflation. We had hard inflation under Nixon, Ford, and Carter. And then along came a really good president, Ronald Reagan, who stabilized the dollar, and we have had very low inflation since Reagan stabilized the dollar in the early 1980s until now. Now, we're seeing some worrisome signs currently that inflation might be making a resurgence. We'll see about that. But the point is that in the early 1970s, after Nixon took us off the gold standard, the median family income flatlined with some temporary upticks under Reagan and under Clinton, and then it just flatlined again in the year 2000. If we were growing at the gold standard rate, at the equitable prosperity gold standard rate for working people as well as for investors, US GDP would now be $30 trillion instead of $20 trillion. And you, Rachel Alexander, and I, Ralph Benko, would be making 50% more than we're currently making, all due to the trashing of the gold standard by Nixon, Ford, Johnson, and ultimately putting the final nail in the coffin, Richard Nixon. So in my column in Newsmax, I reached out to our president, Joe Biden, who's not been having a particularly good month. And I asked him I petitioned him to restore the gold standard, to return America's economic growth to a fabulous, sizzling rate of equitable prosperity. Much to my shock, and I'm sure to your chagrin, I have not gotten a call from the West Wing saying, "Hey, Ralph, come on in and tell us exactly how we're going to do this." So
he's back at Camp David, so give it a few more days.
Well, I'm not giving it a few more days. I published a column in the New York Sun today, reiterating the need to restore the gold standard and the benefit. It's not just a call of moral duty. It's a call of prosperity. A lot of people call themselves Keynesians or supply siders or free markets. I'm a Tallulahite, named the School of Economics that I've named after Tallulah Bankhead, the daughter of the Speaker of the House of Representatives and the original bad girl back in the mid-1960s or so, who said, "Honey, I've been rich and I've been poor. And let me tell you, rich is better." Now, that was actually attributed to Tallulah, but it was actually coined by B. Kaufman. But Tallulah is what was more of the kind of bad girl that I so admire. And so we're going to call.
It doesn't have a ring to it, though. I don't think it's quite. But I want to ask you, Ralph. Okay, let's be totally brutally honest here.
Yeah.
What is the percentage chance that Biden is going to put us back on the gold standard?
Somewhere between 0% and 0.001%. So I'm not optimistic about this, Rachel, but I've been carrying. I was the protege of the great Reagan Gold Commissioner Louis E. Lerman, who in turn was the protege of the great financial wizard of France, of Charles de Gaulle, Jacques Rueff. So we are the we, as well as John Mueller, who was an aide to Representative Jack Kemp, represent this, 3-person school of economics called Reffian Economics. There's only 3 of us, but we are a majority of 3 because we have it right and we can prove it if only anybody would listen. And there is a handful of others. Arthur Laffer has often spoken very positively of the gold standard. His mentor, Bob Mundell, who died earlier this year, devoted his Nobel Prize in Economics winning speech in, I think it was 1999, to the gold standard. And the great Steve Forbes, presidential candidate and publishing icon, is all into the gold standard. There are not very many of us, but boy, are we amazing. So I'm hoping that we can create an echo chamber, maybe even with your help, and maybe even President Joe Biden will feel like, oh my God, I've botched this Afghanistan thing. I've got to change the subject. Maybe if I announce the restoration of the gold standard, I can get myself out of this hot water.
Well, to be fair, I think the odds of Trump returning us to the gold standard were about the same. So,
well, Trump actually talked on the during his campaign. He actually spoke very highly of the gold standard 2 or 3 times. But when he finally got elected, he disappointed me. I wrote column after column after column for Forbes, cheering him on to bring the gold standard and roaring prosperity back. But somehow or other, it didn't happen. So if in fact you restore him, weren't you going to restore him to the presidency last week, August 13th? What happened on that, Rachel?
if you start bringing that stuff up, they're going to ban us from YouTube.
Oh my God. And our millions and millions of followers would have nowhere to find us. Okay, you're right. Anyway, the gold standard is the working man's friend if you do it right. You need to set the price of gold somewhere north of where it's sitting right now, about $1,700, around $2,000 or so, that will privilege labor over capital slightly and debtors over creditors slightly. Lerman has written about this brilliantly in his book, The True Gold Standard. So if there is a labor center-left gold standard as well as a Ebenezer Scrooge right-wing gold standard, and if our dear President Joe Biden really wanted to get the economy roaring at historic levels, he would bring the gold standard back at about $2,000 an ounce, and there'll be no looking back. The deficits would melt away. The federal government would be in surplus, like the way it was under your favorite President Bill Clinton, and we would be, on our way to a golden age of peace.
You're going to get you in trouble by saying things like your favorite President Bill Clinton. Somebody's going to watch this and believe it.
Okay, well, I was just teasing.
And what about in honor of our friend Bill? Don't be calling President Biden, dear president. It's the alleged president. Remember?
It's the. I'm sorry. I'm trying to remember how they handle this in North Korea. The dear leader, right? Or
okay. Now when you say it, the dear leader, I get it.
Yes, our dear leader Joe Biden. And if he brings the gold standard forward, I don't want to say back, because the gold standard is not a retro kind of thing. It's a recipe for equitable prosperity. Then he will have earned the epithet dear leader.
So does that pretty much wrap up our blue collar segment? How we can return to a gold standard that is beneficial to the blue collar, to workers like you and me, even more beneficial to us than it is to investors. Yes, it can be done. It's been done. I know how to do it. The great Louis E. Lerman knows how to do it. Larry White at George Mason knows how to do it. We can, let's, to quote another favorite president of yours, Rachel Alexander, yes, we can. Okay, which one's this one now?
That was Obama's slogan. And you know what? I'm miffed at him. He didn't invite me to his party in the Hamptons. So I'm going to stop. Talking him up.
You've been vaccinated, so like something like that is just not up your alley at this point.
I've been vaccinated.
You got to stay away from those people.
I'm not saying I would have gone, but I would have certainly appreciated an invitation. But in the meantime, yes, you've once again, you've bullseye for the third time, Rachel Alexander. To all of our millions of listeners, if you for some weird reason haven't done it yet, go get vaccinated right now.
We are not ending on that note at all. If you try to end on that note, I'm getting the last word in.
You have the last word, Rachel. Bring it on.
The last word is go read all the articles I have been writing about COVID if you want, to hear the other side from Ralph. So you can find them a lot of them at Arizona Sun-Times, because we're undergoing a lot of controversy right now. And I will be having an article come out on Townhall tomorrow about Catholic high school Brophy here being the first high school in the nation to require vaccinations for kids.
You go, you Catholics. I'm loving it.
No, I'm not Catholic. Right now you're going to have everyone thinking I'm Catholic, but my brother is. So okay. I think that pretty much ends it. Thanks everybody for listening, and tune in to us next week.
Thanks, Rachel. Tune in.